Today we're heading to Nepal, where a story hidden in a decade of data reveals something really surprising about what makes people happy. And no, it's not about money or jobs. It's about public services. We're going to see how one massive political change completely rewrote the rules for citizen satisfaction, from the capital city all the way to the most remote mountain villages.
So get this, here's the puzzle that kicked this whole thing off. Back in 2010, the farther you were from a city in Nepal, the less happy you were with things like schools or healthcare. It just makes sense, right? But flash forward 12 years to 2022, and that whole idea was totally flipped on its head. Suddenly, people in those exact same remote areas were actually more satisfied than folks in the cities. So what on earth happened?
You can think of it like this. In 2010, there was a remoteness penalty. Living far away meant you were less satisfied. But by 2022, that had transformed into a remoteness bonus. It's a complete 180, and that's the mystery we're going to dig into right now.
Okay, so first up, let's just lay out the core of this investigation, Nepal's surprising satisfaction flip. And to understand that flip, we've got to look at our number one suspect, the single biggest thing that happened in Nepal during this time, a truly massive change for the whole nation.
See, right between our two snapshots in time, Nepal's entire system of government changed. In 2010, it was what's called a unitary state, meaning pretty much all the power was centered in the capital, Kathmandu. But in 2015, a new constitution was adopted, and the country became a federal republic, creating brand new governments at the local and provincial levels.
And the whole point of this huge shift to federalism was to decentralize power. The idea was to stop making all the decisions in one central hub, and instead push that power and those services out to the local communities. The goal was to make government more responsive, especially for all those people living in the harder-to-reach parts of the country.
So the big question is, did it work? Well, let's check the report card. Luckily, we have some fantastic data that gives us a perfect before and after picture of how people were actually using public services. First on the list, public health. Between 2010 and 2022, we see a solid jump of more than 7% in households using public health facilities. Okay, that's a good start, a clear positive sign.
And we see a similar story for drinking water. Access to public water systems went up by almost 7%. So another check in the win column.
But here comes the curveball. When we look at public education, usage actually dropped. And by a lot, more than 10%. Turns out more families were starting to choose private schools instead. Suddenly, our puzzle just got a little more complicated.
So we've got this weird mixed bag, right? Use of some services went up, but a big one went down. And yet, and this is the wild part, overall satisfaction with public services still went up. This tells us there has to be something else going on here, something deeper than just usage numbers for one service.
So let's zoom in on that. We really need to unpack these trends, especially that really strange situation with the schools.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The researchers call it the education paradox. Even though way fewer people were using public schools, the people who stayed were actually happier with them. Now, how does that work? Well, it could be a couple of things. Maybe the schools genuinely got better. Or maybe as some families left for private schools, the people who remained just had different expectations.
But while education was this confusing puzzle, drinking water was the absolute hero of the story. By 2022, better access to drinking water was the number one thing driving up people's happiness. It was, without a doubt, the breakout star of the decade.
Still, none of that fully explains that massive satisfaction flip we saw at the start. Which brings us to the study's biggest aha moment, something called the power of the bundle. It turns out it wasn't about any one service, but about using them together. The researchers focused on this idea they call service breadth. And really, it's just a fancy term for a simple question. How many public services is one family using all at once? Are they just sending their kids to public school, or are they using the school and the local health clinic and the public water supply? You get the idea.
Now, back in 2010, this bundling effect was already there. If you used more services, you were happier. Makes sense. Using 2 services instead of none gave you about an 11-point boost in happiness. It was nice, but not exactly a game changer.
But now, look at 2022. Whoa, the effect just exploded. The satisfaction boost you got from using multiple services, it more than doubled. A household using all 3 was now almost 30 points happier than one using none. This synergy, This bundling effect, it became incredibly powerful after the government was decentralized. This is the key.
And the study's author puts it perfectly. He says the number of services a family used became the single best predictor of how happy they were. What that tells us is that when you have an integrated system where people can rely on a whole bundle of services, it creates a sense of well-being that's so much bigger than just adding up the individual parts. Okay, time to bring it all home. Let's put all these clues together and finally solve this puzzle. What does this all mean for Nepal?
So here's the solution. That remoteness penalty from 2010, it vanished because federalism actually worked the way it was supposed to. It successfully delivered a bundle of services to people in rural areas. But for people closer to the cities, a different story was unfolding. They had more choices, their expectations were rising, and so they started getting more critical of public services. It's a classic phenomenon.
So, what are the big takeaways from all this? First, it's all about the bundle. Integrated services are the real key to making citizens happy. Second, as a country develops, just having a service isn't enough. Quality becomes absolutely crucial as expectations go up. Third, while federalism definitely helped, big gaps between regions are still a reality. And finally, let's hear it for drinking water. It was the true MVP of the decade.
And this all leaves us with one last big question to think about. This story from Nepal suggests that as government gets closer and more responsive, we don't just get more satisfied, we also get more demanding. So, is the reward for good government simply a higher bar to clear next time? It's a fascinating thought, isn't it?